All right, hello and welcome to lesson 7 in our algebra review, which is solving quadratics. And this time we're going to be using what is called the square root method, which is why the last lesson was all about simplifying square roots, because now we're going to be solving using square roots and we need to make sure we know how to do that. So I'm going to go through and tell you the steps to solve by using square roots, just like I did with solving by factoring. First step is you want to isolate whatever it is that's being squared. So sometimes it's going to be a variable, so like x squared, y squared, what have you, so sometimes a variable, but sometimes it could be a binomial inside of parentheses. So a binomial being squared. Sometimes you want to get that by itself. Okay? Step 2, you are going to then, once you get whatever is being squared by itself, you are going to take the square root of both sides. That's your second step. And then finally, simplify if it's necessary. Okay? And this time you're going to see that when you take the square root, if you have an equation and you're physically taking the square root of both sides, you're not just simplifying, you have to take the square root, you are going to get two answers a lot of the times. And I'll show you what I mean in the first example. So let's go ahead and look at it. Our first step, remember, is to isolate what's being squared. Well, what's being squared in this problem? X is. So I want to get that x squared by itself. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add 25 to both sides. What I'm left with here is x squared equals 25. Now I am going to physically go and take the square root of both sides. So x is going to equal, and the reason I take the square root of both sides is because squaring and square rooting undo each other. So if I want just x, not x squared, I have to square root both sides to get that x by itself. Now what's going to happen is there's actually two values of x that are going to get you 25 if you were to square them. 5, but also negative 5. So x is going to equal, actually I'm going to write this way, 5 or negative 5. Both of those, if I was to plug it back into the formula, to the original equation, 5 squared minus 25, does that equal 0? Yes. If I take negative 5, now remember, if you take negative 5 and square it, you would have to put in parentheses. Is negative 5 squared minus 25 going to equal 0? It is, because when you square any number, you're going to get a positive. Any integer, when you square it, you're going to get a positive, other than 0, obviously. So the way that we shorthand this, instead of writing it this way, where you'd have to write 5 or negative 5, you can write plus or minus 5. Okay, for number 2, and it says approximate answers, and we're going to round our answers, the directions up here. I didn't read them, but it says to round your approximate answers to the nearest hundredth. So I'll show you what that means. Here, this is exact, so I didn't have to worry about this. This is an exact number. There was no rounding done on my part, so I don't have to worry about rounding it. Okay, over here, remember, you want to get the x squared by itself. That's your first step. If it's a variable being squared, you're going to get that variable by itself. If it was parentheses being squared, you would get those by themselves. So how do I get x squared by itself? You're going to divide by 3, giving you x squared equals 9. Now you have to square root both sides. What number squared is going to equal 9? 3 or negative 3? To write that abbreviated, we write this plus or minus 3, and this again is an exact answer. Many times with a problem like this, students will want to divide both sides by 3x. Again, my goal, but remember, x squared, the variable, no by itself. So I will have 25 x squared equal to 49. Divide both sides by 25, and I end up with x squared equals, leave this alone. Do not try to write this as a decimal. You're not going to have a calculator available, so you want to leave your answers right now in fraction form. Now I would go square root both sides, square Squaring and square rooting undo each other. I'm left with x equals plus or minus the square root of 49 over 25. Okay, so now we have to simplify this radical. I'm going to get x equals, I notice that both the numerator and the denominator here are perfect squares, so I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7, the square root of 25 is 5. This is the exact answer. There's two of them. If I wanted to write this as a decimal, what I would get is plus or minus 1.4. I didn't get 1.472698. I didn't have to round this. So this is actually exact as well. Say, for example, I got a third. A third is exact. If I write 0.3, that's my approximate answer because 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. If I have to round it, if I take a decimal and I round it, that's when my answer is approximate. You have to know the difference between the two throughout the course of this school year, because we are going to oftentimes have exact and approximate answers. Okay, I would like you to try number 4 and pause the video, attempt the problem, check your answer against mine. All right, hopefully you got that x is equal to 0. There's no such thing as a plus or minus 0. 0 does not have a sign, it's just 0. All right, number 5. All right, for number 5, let's get x squared by itself. Again, we want to isolate the variable, so we're going to subtract 24 from both sides. We get negative 50. 2x squared equals negative 50. Divide by 2. X squared is going to equal negative 25. All right, for our purposes in this class, this answer, there is no number that you are aware of that you know that is a negative product when you square it. If you take a positive number and you square it, you get a positive number. If you take a negative number and you square it, you get a positive. So for our purposes, we're going to write no real solutions. Next year, when you're in Algebra 2, you are going to learn how to solve equations like this using imaginary solutions. And so for our class, though, we're not going to mess with imaginary. If you ever get that a variable squared is equal to a negative, we write no real solutions or no solution. Okay, number 6. I'm going to change this to a minus 64. So everybody please change this to a minus 64 because we would get another imaginary solutions. So I'm going to add 64 to both sides. Pause the video, go ahead and solve this. Remember, we want approximate and exact solutions for these. So go ahead and find the answer for what x will equal. Pause the video and try it. Okay, your exact answer should have been x is equal to plus or minus 8 over 7. The approximate answer, when I plug in 8 over 7 into my calculator, I get a decimal that goes on forever. So if we're rounding to the nearest hundreds, that's going to be the second decimal place after, or the second number after the decimal place. So it's 1.14. Notice how I use these little squigglies right here? That indicates right away that that's an approximation, not an exact answer. So x is approximately, is how you would say that out loud, 1.14. Okay, I'm going to add a couple of problems here because we don't have examples of binomials being squared. So please copy this problem down with me. So this is going to be number 7.